March 17th, 1945, 11:42 hours. German Army testing facility, Kummersdorf Proving Grounds, 30 kilometers south of Berlin. Hauptmann Werner Schulze pressed his eye against the surveying theodolite, watching the distant vehicle accelerate across the test range. His hands trembled slightly, not from cold, but from what he was witnessing. The American tank destroyer had just completed its third measured run, and the numbers refused to make sense. 61 kilometers per hour, called out Lieutenant Klaus Hoffmann from the timing station, his voice tight with disbelief. On rough ground, with a 76mm gun. Schulze straightened from the instrument, removing his cap to wipe the sweat from his forehead despite the March chill. Around him, a dozen German engineers and Wehrmacht officers stood in stunned silence, watching the M18 Hellcat complete another impossibly fast circuit of the test track. 3 days ago, this vehicle had been captured, intact near Remagen, after its crew abandoned it during the American crossing of the Rhine. For 3 days, German engineers had been systematically testing it, measuring it, trying to understand it, and for 3 days, everything they discovered had violated every principle of German armoured vehicle design. The Hellcat sat idling now at the far end of the range, its open-topped turret and thin armour almost comically inadequate by German standards. Yet this flimsy vehicle had just achieved speeds that German tanks could not match on paved autobahns, let alone across rough terrain. It mounted a gun powerful enough to penetrate German medium tanks. It weighed less than half a Panther, and according to interrogation reports from captured American crews, it had been hunting German armour with terrifying effectiveness for nearly a year. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from. Today, Schulze had spent 23 years in the German army. He had served in Poland, France, and 3 brutal years on the Eastern Front, before being reassigned to weapons testing at Kummersdorf in late 1944. He understood tanks, he understood German doctrine. He understood the careful engineering that produced Panthers and Tigers, vehicles built with thick armour, powerful guns, and methodical precision. What he did not understand was how the Americans had built something that moved like a racing car, fought like a tank destroyer, and somehow achieved combat results that German intelligence could no longer deny. The story of this particular M18 Hellcat began 2 weeks earlier, on March 4, 1945, when elements of the US 9th Armored Division captured the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen. The bridge, one of the last remaining intact crossings over the Rhine River, became the focal point of desperate fighting as American forces poured across and German forces attempted to contain the bridgehead. The 603rd Tank Destroyer Battalion, equipped with M18 Hellcats, was among the first units to cross, establishing defensive positions on the east bank. On March 7th, as German counterattacks intensified, one M18 from B Company suffered a thrown track while manoeuvring through the rubble-strewn streets of Erpel. The crew, under heavy artillery fire, made the decision to abandon the vehicle after unsuccessful repair attempts. They removed the breech blocks from the main gun, destroyed what documents they could, and withdrew to American lines. The damaged Hellcat sat abandoned for 3 days as the battle raged around it. German forces, desperate for any intelligence on American armour capabilities, organised a recovery operation on the night of March 10th. A team from the 503rd Heavy Panzer Battalion, supported by engineers from the Weapons Testing Command, managed to attach towing cables to the abandoned M18 under cover of darkness. Using a captured American tank recovery vehicle, they towed the Hellcat back across German lines, eventually transporting it to Kummersdorf for detailed examination. The facility at Kummersdorf had served as Germany's primary weapons testing centre since 1929. Its vast ranges and comprehensive workshop facilities had tested every major German armoured vehicle from the Panzer I through the King Tiger. The engineers stationed there represented the finest technical minds in the German army, men who understood metallurgy, ballistics, automotive engineering, and armour design at the highest levels. They had examined captured Soviet 34s, British Churchills, and American Shermans. They believed they understood Allied tank design philosophy. The M18 Hellcat shattered every assumption they held. Initial examination began on March 13th with a complete photographic documentation of the vehicle's exterior. German engineers methodically measured every dimension, noting the vehicle's overall length of 6.3 meters, including the gun, width of 2.87 meters, and height of 2.5 meters to the top of the turret. The low profile surprised them immediately. German tank destroyers like the Jagd Panther stood significantly taller, making them easier to spot and engage. The weight measurement came next, conducted using the facility's truck scales. The Hellcat registered 18.4 tons, fully loaded with ammunition. For comparison, a German Panther tank weighed 44.8 tons, nearly 2.5 times heavier. The German engineers exchanged glances as they recorded this figure. How could a vehicle weighing less than 20 tons mount a 76mm gun and achieve the performance levels described in intelligence reports? Armor thickness measurements provided the first major shock. Using precision calipers and ultrasonic testing equipment, engineers determined that the Hellcat's hull front armor measured just 12.7 millimeters at its thickest point. The turret front, the most heavily armored section, was only 25.4 millimeters thick. The side armor was even thinner, ranging from 12.7 millimeters on the hull to 19 millimeters on the turret. Oberingenieur Friedrich Hartmann, chief metallurgist at Kummersdorf, ran his hand along the hull armor and turned to his colleagues with an expression of disbelief. "Gentlemen, this armor would not stop our 20mm anti-aircraft guns. A Panzerfaust would pass completely through both sides. This is not a tank. This is barely an armored car." Yet intelligence reports documented this vehicle, destroying Panthers, Tigers, and even King Tigers in combat. The contradiction demanded explanation. Either the Americans were suicidally reckless in their design philosophy, or they understood something about armored warfare that German doctrine had missed. The examination moved to the vehicle's armament. The 76mm M1A2 gun, even with its breech block removed by the American crew, provided valuable intelligence. German engineers measured the barrel length at 52 calibers, approximately 3.9 meters. The gun's mounting and recoil system showed sophisticated engineering, with a hydraulic recoil mechanism that efficiently absorbed firing stresses. Most significantly, captured ammunition found in the vehicle's ready racks revealed two distinct types. The standard M62 armor-piercing capped ballistic cap rounds showed conventional design with solid steel penetrators, but the M93 hypervelocity armor-piercing rounds incorporated tungsten carbide cores, a precious material Germany itself had been forced to abandon for most ammunition production due to strategic shortages. Ballistics tests conducted at Kummersdorf's firing range demonstrated the M93 rounds' capabilities. Fired at captured Panther armor plate from 100 meters, the tungsten-cored projectile achieved complete penetration of the 40mm side armor with energy remaining. Additional tests against turret armor samples showed penetration capability exceeding 150mm of rolled homogeneous armor at close range. Hartmann's report noted with bitter irony that the Americans were using tungsten, a material Germany desperately lacked, for ordinary tank destroyer ammunition, while Germany reserved its dwindling tungsten stocks for only the most critical applications. This single detail revealed the vast disparity in industrial resources between the two nations. The engine examination provided the second major revelation. Removing the rear deck plates exposed the Wright R975C4 radial engine, a 9-cylinder aircraft-type power plant generating 400 horsepower at 2,400 revolutions per minute. The supercharger installation, using a gear-driven centrifugal compressor, particularly impressed the German engineers. This was sophisticated automotive engineering, applying aircraft technology to ground vehicle propulsion. Lieutenant Hoffmann, who had served as a Panther crew commander before his assignment to Kummersdorf, studied the engine installation with growing comprehension. "This explains the acceleration," he said quietly. 400 horsepower pushing less than 20 tons. The power-to-weight ratio is over 20 horsepower per ton. Our Panther manages barely 15. The implications were staggering. The M18 could accelerate faster than any German tank. It could reach higher speeds. It could maintain those speeds across rough terrain where German vehicles bogged down. The lightweight construction that seemed like a fatal flaw actually enabled revolutionary mobility. The transmission examination revealed another surprise. Instead of the complex manual gearboxes used in German tanks, requiring skilled double clutching and careful gear selection, the M18 employed a hydromatic automatic transmission with a torque converter. The driver needed only to select forward or reverse and control the throttle. The transmission handled all gear changes automatically, allowing the driver to focus entirely on vehicle control and terrain navigation. German engineers had experimented with automatic transmissions for the Panther and Tiger, but development problems and production complexities had prevented implementation. The Americans had not only solved these problems, but had made automatic transmissions standard equipment on the M18. This seemingly minor detail had major tactical implications. German tank drivers required extensive training to master manual transmissions under combat stress. American M18 drivers could achieve expert vehicle control with far less training, and they never lost momentum during gear changes. The suspension system used torsion bars mounted transversely in the hull floor, supporting 5 road wheels per side. The track design employed rubber-bushed steel links, wider than comparable German tracks despite the vehicle's lighter weight. This combination produced remarkably low ground pressure, just 10.5 pounds per square inch according to German calculations. By comparison, a Panther exerted 15.2 pounds per square inch, and a King Tiger exceeded 16 pounds per square inch. Lower ground pressure meant superior mobility across soft ground. Where heavy German tanks sank into mud or snow, the lightweight Hellcat could maintain traction and speed. The wide tracks distributed weight efficiently, preventing the vehicle from bogging down in conditions that would immobilize heavier armor. But the true test would come on the proving ground ranges, where the M18 would be driven by German crews under controlled conditions. Schulze personally selected the test drivers, choosing men with extensive combat experience on multiple vehicle types. They would push the Hellcat to its limits, measuring every aspect of its performance, attempting to find the weaknesses that must exist in such a lightly armoured vehicle. On March 15th, the first driving tests began. Oberfeldwebel Ernst Müller, a veteran Panther driver with 4 years of combat experience, climbed into the M18's driver position. The seat, controls, and instrument layout differed significantly from German vehicles. The steering levers required less effort. The pedals were positioned differently. The automatic transmission selector was entirely unfamiliar. But after 30 minutes of familiarization, Müller reported himself ready for the first test run. The engine started immediately, a detail Müller noted with approval. In cold weather, German tanks often required lengthy warm-up procedures, sometimes refusing to start at all without auxiliary heating. The right radial fired on the first attempt, settling into a smooth idle that vibrated the entire vehicle less than German engines. Müller engaged the transmission, felt the torque converter take hold, and pressed the accelerator. The M18 surged forward with shocking acceleration, pushing Müller back in his seat. Within 7 seconds, the speedometer showed 50 kilometers per hour. Within 15 seconds, the vehicle was traveling at 80 kilometers per hour across the test range's packed dirt surface. Impossible, breathed Hoffmann, watching through binoculars. He is going 80 kilometers per hour on dirt. Our Panthers cannot achieve that speed on paved roads. The timing team measured the run precisely, 0 to 50 kilometers per hour in 7 seconds. Maximum speed on level ground, 88 kilometers per hour. The American specification claimed 89 kilometers per hour maximum, and the captured vehicle, even with uncertain maintenance history, nearly matched that figure. Cross-country performance proved equally impressive. Across rough terrain with ditches, small obstacles, and uneven ground, the M18 maintained speeds between 40 and 50 kilometers per hour. A Panther attempting the same course would manage perhaps 25 kilometers per hour, while subjecting the crew to brutal jolting and mechanical stress. The acceleration tests were repeated multiple times to ensure accuracy. From a standing start, the M18 consistently reached 50 kilometers per hour in 7 to 8 seconds. By comparison, a Panther required approximately 20 seconds to reach the same speed, and a King Tiger needed nearly 30 seconds. In combat, this meant the M18 could accelerate out of ambush positions and reach cover before German tanks could even traverse their turrets to engage. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The turning tests revealed another advantage. The M18 could execute a neutral turn, rotating in place around its own center, in just 12 seconds to complete a turn, full 360 degrees. The Panther required 18 seconds for the same maneuver. The King Tiger needed 28 seconds. In close-quarters combat, where seconds determined survival, the M18's agility was decisive. Braking performance surprised the test team. From 50 kilometers per hour, the M18 stopped in just 31 meters on dry ground. The hydraulic brake system, operating on all road wheels, provided powerful, controllable stopping force. German tanks used mechanical brakes that required greater stopping distances and more driver skill to prevent skidding. Fuel consumption measurements provided sobering data for the German engineers. The M18 carried 657 litres of gasoline in its internal tanks. Under normal driving conditions on roads, this provided approximately 160 kilometres of range. Cross-country operations reduced range to approximately 100 kilometres. Combat operations with frequent acceleration, high speed, maneuvers, and extended high-power running reduced range further, to perhaps 80 kilometers. These figures were calculated by measuring fuel consumption during the test runs and extrapolating based on tank capacity. While not as fuel-efficient as German diesel engines, the right radial's reliability and power output compensated for higher consumption. More importantly, American forces in 1945 had effectively unlimited fuel supplies. German forces faced critical shortages that often left their superior tanks immobilized for lack of fuel. The weapons testing came next, conducted on Kummersdorf's firing range with ammunition recovered from the captured vehicle. German engineers had fabricated a replacement breech block, carefully machined to match the original American specifications. This allowed live-fire testing of the 76mm gun system. The first rounds fired were standard M62 armor-piercing ammunition, firing at captured Panther armor plates. Positioned at 500 meters, the results documented penetration of the 40mm side armor in every shot. Against 60mm armor at the same range, penetration was inconsistent, succeeding approximately 50% of the time depending on impact angle. Against Panther frontal armor, 80mm thick and sloped at 55 degrees from vertical, the M62 rounds failed to penetrate at 500 meters. This matched intelligence assessments indicating that M18 crews could not engage Panthers frontally with standard ammunition. They required flank shots or the scarce hypervelocity rounds. Testing with the captured M93 tungsten cord ammunition produced dramatically different results. Against Panther frontal armor at 500 meters, penetration occurred in 3 out of 4 shots. Against Tiger 1 frontal armor, 100mm thick and vertical, penetration succeeded at ranges up to 800 meters. The M93 round transformed the M18 from a vehicle requiring careful tactical positioning to one capable of defeating German heavy tanks even from less favorable angles. The gun's rate of fire impressed the German observers as much as its penetration capability. An experienced German gunner, Unteroffizier Hans Richter, who had served in Tiger tanks on the Eastern Front, manned the M18's gun for timed firing tests. With the loader working smoothly and ammunition readily accessible in the turret basket, Richter achieved a sustained rate of 12 rounds per minute for the first 3 minutes, then maintained 8 to 10 rounds per minute for extended engagements. The turret traverse, Richter reported after completing his firing tests, is faster than anything we have. Full 360 degrees in 20 seconds using the hydraulic power traverse. Our Tigers need 60 seconds for the same rotation. Our Panthers need about 45 seconds, even with properly maintained systems. This single specification explained countless intelligence reports of M18s engaging German tanks and vanishing before return fire could be delivered. The combination of rapid turret traverse, quick target acquisition through excellent American optics, and devastating acceleration meant the Hellcat could shoot and displace in the time it took a German tank to identify the threat and begin rotating its turret. Schulze compiled these findings into his preliminary report, dated March 18, 1945. His conclusions were presented to senior Wehrmacht officers at a briefing on March 20th at the Reich Chancellery bunker in Berlin, where Albert Speer, Heinrich Himmler, and several Wehrmacht generals were assembled to review intelligence on Allied weapons systems. "Gentlemen," Schulze began, standing before detailed charts and photographs of the captured M18, "we have completed our initial assessment of the American M18 tank destroyer. The results challenge everything we understand about armored vehicle design." He clicked through a series of photographs showing the Hellcat from multiple angles. This vehicle weighs 18.4 tons. Its armor ranges from 12.7 mm to 25.4 mm maximum. By our standards, this armor is inadequate to stop heavy machine gun fire at close range. A single Panzerfaust would completely penetrate both sides. Several officers nodded, apparently satisfied that German weapons could easily destroy this vehicle. Schulze continued, "However, this vehicle mounts a 76 mm gun capable of penetrating Panther side armor at 1,500 meters. With special tungsten ammunition, it can penetrate Tiger frontal armor at 800 meters. The gun's rate of fire exceeds our tank weapons by approximately 50%. The nodding stopped. Speer leaned forward, his expression sharpening. "Penetrate Tiger frontal armor? With a vehicle weighing less than 20 tons? "Yes, Herr Minister. But the gun is not the primary weapon. The primary weapon is speed." Schulze advanced to the next chart showing performance specifications. Maximum speed on roads, 88 km per hour. Maximum speed cross-country, 42 km per hour. Acceleration from 0 to 50 km per hour, 7 seconds. These figures have been verified through multiple measured test runs at Kummersdorf. The room fell silent. SS Obergruppenführer Karl Wolf broke the quiet with a question that voiced what others were thinking. "How is this possible? Our Panthers weigh 45 tons and cannot achieve even 60 km per hour on roads. Power-to-weight ratio, Herr Obergruppenführer. The M18 achieves over 20 horsepower per ton. Our Panther manages 15. The American vehicle also employs an automatic transmission, allowing the driver to maintain maximum power to the ground without interruption for gear changes. The suspension and wide tracks provide ground pressure of just 10.5 pounds per square inch, permitting high-speed operation across soft terrain that would immobilize our heavier vehicles." Schulze advanced to the next section of his briefing, showing tactical diagrams. Intelligence reports from the Eastern and Western fronts consistently describe M18 engagements following identical patterns. The vehicle appears from an unexpected direction, fires 2 to 4 rounds in rapid succession, then disappears at high speed before our tanks can respond. The entire engagement lasts between 2 and 4 minutes. By the time our turrets traverse to engage, the M18 is displacing at speeds our tanks cannot match. He displayed a map showing M18 battalion positions during the Battle of the Bulge. During defensive operations at Bastogne in December 1944, the American 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion, equipped with M18s, claimed 40 German tanks destroyed for the loss of 6 M18s. This represents a kill ratio of nearly 7 to 1. Similar ratios appear in reports from other sectors. Generaloberst Heinz Guderian, Inspector General of Armoured Troops, spoke with barely controlled anger. Are you suggesting, Hauptmann, that American crews in vehicles with armor barely thicker than tin are destroying our Tigers and Panthers at 7-to-1 ratios? I am reporting verified combat results, Herr General Oberst. The M18 battalions maintain the highest kill ratios of any American armored unit. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion achieved similar results at Aracourt. The 609th destroyed 14 German tanks while losing only one M18 near Noville. Schulze knew his next statement would provoke resistance, but accuracy demanded honesty. The American design philosophy is fundamentally different from ours. We build tanks as breakthrough weapons and mobile fortresses, emphasizing armor protection and gun power. The Americans have built the M18 as a pure hunter. It sacrifices all protection for speed and accepts vulnerability to achieve mobility that renders our armor's advantages irrelevant. Speer studied the specifications with an engineer's eye. How many have they produced? If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Allied intelligence suggests approximately 2,500 vehicles between July 1943 and October 1944. Production was concentrated at a single factory in Flint, Michigan. Our bombing campaign against American industrial targets has been negligible compared to Allied bombing of our facilities. The implications hung unspoken. Germany had built roughly 6,000 Panthers over 3 years, struggling with quality control, material shortages, and component failures. America had built 2,500 M18s in 15 months, using proven components and simplified manufacturing. The industrial disparity was crushing. Guderian asked the question that mattered most. Can we build something similar? Schulze had anticipated this. Theoretically, yes, we possess the technical capability. However, implementation would require complete redesign of our armored vehicle doctrine, retooling of production facilities, and abandonment of our emphasis on armor protection. More critically, it would require resources we no longer possess. The M18 uses an aircraft-type radial engine producing 400 horsepower. We lack the production capacity for such engines. It employs an automatic transmission, technology we have not successfully implemented in production vehicles. The aluminum components and specialized alloys require materials we can no longer obtain in sufficient quantities. He paused, letting the reality settle. Even if we could build such a vehicle, we lack the fuel to operate it and the logistical infrastructure to maintain it in the field. The Americans can build 2,500 tank destroyers because they have unlimited industrial capacity, unlimited resources, and unlimited fuel. We can barely maintain our existing force. The briefing concluded with a moment of uncomfortable silence. The officers understood what Schulze had really reported. The M18 Hellcat was not just a successful weapon system. It was proof that American industrial and tactical philosophy had evolved to counter German armor effectively. The Wehrmacht's technological edge, if it had ever truly existed, was gone. But the story of the captured M18 did not end with Schulze's briefing. The vehicle remained at Kummersdorf for additional testing throughout late March and early April 1945 as Soviet forces advanced toward Berlin. German engineers continued documenting every aspect of its design, perhaps recognizing that this knowledge might be valuable in some imagined post-war reconstruction. On April 16, 1945, Soviet artillery began, shelling Kummersdorf as the Red Army's final offensive against Berlin commenced. Engineers hurriedly photographed the captured M18 one final time, packed their documentation, and prepared to evacuate. The Hellcat, along with numerous other captured Allied vehicles, was abandoned at the facility as German personnel withdrew westward. Soviet forces captured Kummersdorf on April 20th. The M18, with German markings hastily painted on its turret and tactical numbers added to its hull, was initially mistaken for a German design. Soviet intelligence officers quickly identified it as American and ordered its transport to the Kubinka testing grounds near Moscow, where it joined other captured vehicles for Soviet evaluation. Soviet testing reached many of the same conclusions the Germans had documented. The vehicle's speed and agility impressed Soviet engineers, who compared it favorably to their own Su-85 and Su-100 tank destroyers. Soviet reports noted that the M18's mobility exceeded anything in the Red Army inventory, while maintaining firepower comparable to their medium tank destroyers. However, Soviet doctrine emphasized armor protection more than German or American approaches. Soviet engineers concluded that while the M18 represented excellent engineering, its thin armor made it unsuitable for the close-range, brutal combat conditions typical of the Eastern Front. The report recommended that any future Soviet tank destroyer development incorporate M18-style mobility, but with significantly increased armor protection. The psychological impact on German tank crews who learned about the Hellcat's capabilities was devastating and complex. For years, German tankers had been trained to believe in the superiority of German engineering. The Panther was presented as the world's finest medium tank. The Tiger was described as invincible. German armor doctrine emphasized careful positioning, long-range gunnery, and exploitation of superior German optics and gun performance. The M18 violated all these assumptions. Its armor was laughable by German standards, yet it consistently destroyed German tanks. Its gun was smaller than the 88mm weapons on Tigers, yet it achieved similar combat results through superior tactics and ammunition. Its crew comfort and visibility were inferior to German designs, yet American crews achieved higher kill ratios. Lieutenant Hoffmann, after completing his work with the captured M18, was reassigned to a training unit, preparing replacement crews for the crumbling Eastern Front. He found himself unable to teach the old doctrine with the same conviction. "What could I tell them?" he later recounted in post-war interviews. That German tanks were superior. I had seen the American vehicle. I had driven it. I knew that if they encountered an M18 in combat, their survival would depend on luck, not superior German engineering. This demoralization affected veteran crews even more severely than replacements. Men who had survived years of combat in Panthers and Tigers understood tank warfare intimately. They knew that the Hellcat's combination of speed, firepower, and tactics rendered their experience and training partially obsolete. The careful positioning they had learned, the patient long-range gunnery they had mastered, the confidence in their armor protection, all became liabilities against an enemy that appeared from unexpected directions, fired rapidly, and vanished before counterfire could be delivered. German intelligence compiled extensive reports on M18 employment, from interrogations of captured American crews and after-action analysis of battlefield losses. These reports circulated through Wehrmacht armored units in the war's final months, attempting to develop counter-tactics. The recommendations revealed the depth of the problem. Directive issued by Panzer Command West on March 25, 1945, advised that M18s should never be engaged frontally if avoidable. Crews were instructed to deploy smoke immediately upon sighting Hellcats, denying them clear fields of fire. Ambush tactics were recommended, with German tanks positioned in concealment and firing only when M18s closed to point-blank range, where their speed advantage was minimized. Most tellingly, the directive advised that encountering M18s in open terrain should be avoided entirely. German tanks were instructed to withdraw to prepared positions where terrain limited enemy mobility, rather than attempting to engage in mobile warfare, where the Hellcat's speed proved decisive. This was an admission that German armor could no longer compete with American tank destroyers in the type of fluid, mobile combat that German doctrine had pioneered earlier in the war. The industrial and logistical differences became even more apparent to German crews through mundane details. American forces in 1945 enjoyed such abundant supplies that damaged M18s were often abandoned and replaced, rather than repaired. German tankers who examined abandoned Hellcats found vehicles that had been left behind for minor mechanical issues that German crews would have repaired in the field. This casual discard of equipment, reflecting unlimited American production capacity, was perhaps more demoralizing than the vehicle's combat performance. German maintenance personnel who examined captured or abandoned M18s marveled at the standardization and interchangeability of components. Parts were marked with clear identification numbers. Assembly was logical and accessible. Repair manuals, when captured, provided explicit instructions with detailed diagrams. By contrast, German vehicles by 1945 often incorporated field modifications, substitute materials, and improvised repairs that made standardization impossible. The automatic transmission generated particular interest among German mechanics. They understood that this technology, while increasing mechanical complexity, dramatically simplified driver training and reduced fatigue during extended operations. A German Panther driver required months of training to master the manual transmission and steering controls under combat stress. An M18 driver could achieve basic proficiency in weeks, with the automatic transmission handling gear selection while the driver focused on tactics and terrain. This difference reflected broader industrial philosophies. German engineering sought perfection through craftsmanship and precision. American engineering sought reliability through simplicity and standardization. The M18 embodied American philosophy completely. Its components were commercially derived proven designs from automotive and aircraft industries. Its construction emphasized function over form. Its maintenance requirements were designed for relatively unskilled personnel using common tools. The post-war fate of the specific M18 captured at Remagen remains somewhat unclear. Soviet records indicate it was eventually scrapped at Kubinka in the early 1950s after serving as a training aid and technical reference. The detailed measurements, photographs, and test data compiled by German engineers at Kummersdorf were captured by Soviet forces and incorporated into their own tank destroyer development programs. Some of this documentation was later shared with East German military archives, where it influenced post-war armored vehicle development in the German Democratic Republic. West German archives received copies through intelligence sharing with American forces in the 1950s. Today, fragments of Schultz's original report exist in multiple archives, providing historians with detailed German perspective on American armor technology. The broader impact of the M18 on German armored forces extended beyond the specific vehicles encountered in combat. The Hellcat's success forced German commanders to reconsider fundamental assumptions about armored warfare. For years, German doctrine had emphasized that superior armor and firepower would defeat numerically superior but technically inferior enemies. This had worked against Polish, French, and early Soviet equipment. By 1944 and 1945, however, Allied equipment was no longer inferior. The M18 represented Western Allied design philosophy at its most refined. Acceptance of vulnerability in exchange for overwhelming mobility and firepower, supported by industrial capacity that could replace losses faster than combat could inflict them. This was warfare as Americans understood it, emphasizing materiel superiority and logistical depth over tactical excellence and individual vehicle quality. German responses to the Hellcat threat revealed the Wehrmacht's declining capability in the war's final year. Plans were proposed for lighter, faster tank destroyers to counter M18 tactics. The E-Series development program included designs for vehicles emphasizing mobility over armor. None of these projects advanced beyond prototype stages. Germany in 1945 lacked the time, resources, and industrial capacity to implement major new weapons systems. The most practical German response was tactical adaptation. Armored units increasingly operated from prepared defensive positions where M18 mobility advantages were minimized. German tanks fought from ambush rather than seeking engagement, hoping to destroy Hellcats before their speed could be employed. Heavy anti-tank guns were positioned to cover likely M18 approach routes. These tactics achieved some success. M18 losses increased in the war's final months as German defenses stiffened and American forces advanced into terrain that favored defenders. However, the fundamental problem remained unsolved. In mobile warfare, which characterized most combat in 1945 as Allied forces drove deep into Germany, The M18's speed and agility gave it decisive advantages that no tactical adaptation could fully counter. American commanders understood the M18's strengths and limitations better than German intelligence appreciated. Tank destroyer doctrine explicitly warned against frontal engagement with heavy German armor using standard ammunition. M18 crews were trained to exploit their mobility, attacking from flanks and rear where even Panther and Tiger armor was vulnerable. This tactical employment, combined with the vehicle's inherent capabilities, produced the extraordinary combat results that so impressed and dismayed German analysts. The M18 was not a better tank than the Panther or Tiger. It was a different weapon system employed according to different tactical doctrine against an enemy whose mobility was increasingly constrained by fuel shortages, mechanical problems, and Allied air superiority. The final irony of the captured M18's story is that by the time German engineers completed their analysis in April 1945, the information was effectively useless. Germany had perhaps 4 weeks remaining before unconditional surrender. No amount of technical intelligence could offset the overwhelming Allied material and manpower superiority at that stage. The war's outcome was determined, yet the men who studied the Hellcat at Kummersdorf gained insights that would shape their post-war understanding of military technology. Many German engineers and officers who survived the war and later worked with NATO forces or West German military development brought hard lessons from vehicles like the M18. They had learned that technical sophistication without adequate industrial support was a liability. They understood that reliability and maintainability mattered more than peak performance. They recognized that doctrine and tactics must match equipment capabilities. These lessons influenced post-war German armored vehicle development. The Bundeswehr's Leopard 1 main battle tank, developed in the 1960s, reflected philosophy closer to the M18 than to German World War II designs. The Leopard prioritized mobility and firepower over armor protection, accepting vulnerability to emphasize speed and agility. This represented a fundamental shift from Wehrmacht doctrine, influenced partially by analysis of vehicles like the Hellcat that had demonstrated the combat effectiveness of mobility-focused design. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe. For the individual German tankers who encountered M18s in combat, the psychological impact was immediate and personal. Hans Becker, a Panther commander who survived an engagement with Hellcats near the Rhine in March 1945, later described the experience in interviews. "We heard the engines first, very high-pitched, unlike our diesels. Then we saw movement perhaps 800 meters away. Before we could traverse our turret, they had fired 3 times. One round hit our track, immobilizing us. By the time we could return fire, they were gone. We sat there, helpless, expecting the next shot that would kill us. It never came. They had already moved to engage another target. This sense of helplessness, of being hunted by an enemy you could not effectively counter, eroded morale as effectively as actual casualties. German tank crews had been taught they were the elite, equipped with the world's finest armor. Encounters with M18s revealed this as propaganda. The reality was that they were outmatched by American crews in lighter, faster vehicles backed by unlimited industrial production. The contrast between German and American design philosophy, made explicit through examination of the captured M18, highlighted fundamental differences in how each nation approached warfare. Germany sought battlefield dominance through technical superiority and tactical excellence. Individual vehicles and crews were expected to be superior to enemy counterparts, compensating for numerical inferiority through quality advantages. America approached warfare as an industrial and logistical challenge. Individual vehicles need not be superior if they were reliable, easily maintained, and produced in overwhelming numbers. Crews need not achieve individual excellence if they could be rapidly trained to standard proficiency and supported by doctrine that emphasized their vehicle's strengths. Victory came not from having the best tanks, but from having enough good tanks deployed effectively with unlimited supply support. The M18 Hellcat embodied American philosophy completely. It was not the best armed vehicle, German tank destroyers mounted larger guns. It was not the best protected vehicle. Almost anything could penetrate its armor. It was not even particularly reliable by American standards. Mechanical issues plagued Hellcat units throughout the war, but it was fast. It was deadly when properly employed, and there were enough of them to saturate the battlefield with mobile firepower that German armor could not effectively counter. For Hauptmann Werner Schulze, standing at Kummersdorf in March 1945, watching the captured M18 complete another high-speed run across the test range, the larger meaning was inescapable. Germany had lost the armoured warfare revolution it had pioneered. The nation that had shocked the world with blitzkrieg tactics in 1939 and 1940 now faced enemies who had learned, adapted, and ultimately surpassed German capabilities through different approaches, emphasizing industrial capacity over technical sophistication. The numbers told the story more clearly than any amount of tactical analysis. 2,500 M18 Hellcats built in 15 months, over 500 verified tank kills, achieving the highest kill ratio of any American armored vehicle in World War II. Production cost of $55,000 per vehicle in 1943, cheap enough that losses were easily replaced. Fuel consumption that American logistics could support indefinitely, rendering German fuel shortages irrelevant by comparison. Against this, Germany fielded 6,000 Panthers over 3 years, struggling with quality control and mechanical reliability. 492 King Tigers, each representing resources that could have built 3 medium tanks. Chronic fuel shortages that left even operational tanks immobilized. Industrial facilities devastated by Allied bombing, reducing production rates month by month. A logistical system stretched beyond breaking across multiple fronts. The captured M18 at Kummersdorf represented more than an individual vehicle. It symbolized the industrial and tactical evolution that had overtaken German armored forces. The Wehrmacht had begun the war with superior tanks, superior tactics, and superior crew training. By 1945, all 3 advantages had been neutralized or reversed. Allied tanks like the Sherman, though individually inferior to German heavies, were sufficiently capable when properly employed. Allied tactics had evolved to emphasize combined arms coordination and overwhelming firepower. Allied crew training, while perhaps less intensive than German standards, was adequate for vehicles designed for ease of operation. Most critically, Allied industrial capacity was unlimited by any practical measure. For every German tank destroyed, 3 replacements might eventually be built if resources permitted. For every American tank destroyed, 10 replacements were already in the supply chain. This mathematical disparity rendered German tactical successes ultimately meaningless. Even winning individual engagements changed nothing when the enemy could absorb losses indefinitely, while German losses were irreplaceable. The M18 Hellcat, with its thin armor and powerful gun mounted on a chassis that moved faster than seemed possible for a tracked vehicle, proved that American engineers understood 20th century warfare better than their German counterparts. Wars were won by economies and factories as much as by soldiers and tactics. The nation that could produce more, supply more, and replace more would ultimately prevail, regardless of individual weapon quality. German tank crews who survived to war's end carried these lessons forward. They had witnessed the evolution of American armor doctrine from the clumsy Sherman tactics of Normandy to the sophisticated combined arms operations of 1945. They had seen weapon systems like the M18 that seemed crude by German standards achieve devastating combat effectiveness through proper tactical employment and unlimited logistical support. In barracks and prison camps across occupied Germany in the summer of 1945, German tankers shared stories and compared experiences. The M18 featured prominently in these discussions. It became symbolic of how the war had been lost, representing not just a successful enemy weapon system, but a comprehensive American approach to industrial warfare that Germany had been unable to match. The vehicle tested at Kummersdorf, timed accelerating across the range at speeds that violated every principle of armored vehicle design, was more than a tank destroyer. It was evidence of a new kind of warfare, where mobility trumped protection, where industrial capacity overwhelmed tactical excellence, and where the nation that could build faster, supply better, and replace quickest would inevitably triumph. For German engineers and officers who examined it, the M18 Hellcat was not just impressive, it was a revelation, demonstrating that Germany had lost not merely a military conflict, but an entire industrial and philosophical competition that determined the modern world's future.